The record shows, and what it reveals changes everything. Where's your evidence, Congressman? The question cracked through the Senate hearing room like a gunshot. Adam Schiff froze in place. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Dan Bongino did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He placed a thick folder on the table with a sound that echoed through the chamber. The red classification markings were visible even from the gallery. 53 witness transcripts, years of testimony, and a public record that told a very different story than the one Americans had been sold. Schiff had spent years telling television audiences that the proof existed. He had said it on Meet the Press. He had said it on CNN. He had said it on MSNBC. More than circumstantial evidence, he claimed, again and again. Bongino leaned forward. "So I'll ask you plainly," he said. "Where is it?" There was no interruption from the chair. There was no objection from the committee. What followed would stretch nearly 40 minutes. By the 12th minute, Schiff's lead attorney would stand and leave. By the 23rd minute, Democratic senators would begin slipping out of the room. By the 38th minute, Schiff would sit alone, staring forward, unable to answer the simplest question. 4 years earlier, Schiff had told Chuck Todd that evidence existed. He had told Rachel Maddow that a conspiracy was forming. He had told Jake Tapper that prosecutions were coming. Those statements were not disputed. They were on tape. Bongino did not argue opinions. He read transcripts. He cited dates. He quoted Schiff's own words back to him. The Mueller report found no criminal conspiracy. The Durham report found no coordinated plot. Multiple investigations concluded without charges related to collusion. Yet Schiff had continued making public claims long after those findings were known. That contradiction sat at the center of the room. The hearing had been billed as routine FBI oversight. Most such sessions pass unnoticed. This one did not. Federal marshals stood at every exit. Cameras filled every aisle. Schiff arrived early. His suit was immaculate. His confidence was practiced. For years, he had been treated as the face of institutional certainty. Today, the tone was different. Bongino sat without notes. No entourage surrounded him. Just the folder. Years in law enforcement showed in his stillness. This was not television for him. The chairman gabbled the hearing to order. Opening statements passed quickly. When Schiff's turn came, he spoke calmly. He framed the session as professional and procedural. He expected control. Bongino did not respond immediately. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. Cameras stayed locked on his face. Then he opened the folder. He removed a single page. Only then did he look up. The room shifted. "There is nothing routine about today," Bongino said. His voice was even. He explained his background briefly. 2 decades across law enforcement agencies, and one lesson learned early. Liars assume no one is keeping track. He paused. "I kept track." He addressed Schiff by his first name. The choice was deliberate. Bongino referenced a March 2017 interview. Meet the Press. A direct question from Chuck Todd. A clear answer from Schiff. More than circumstantial evidence. He asked again where that evidence was. He asked it slowly. He asked it on the record. Schiff attempted to interject. Bongino continued. He explained what was in the folder. Transcripts from 53 witnesses, under oath, collected by Schiff's own committee. Not a single one supported the public claims. Those transcripts had remained sealed for years. During that time, Schiff continued appearing on television. He spoke with certainty. He spoke with authority. The contradiction was documented. Bongino began listing witnesses, directors of intelligence, senior Justice Department officials, FBI leadership, every individual who would know. Each transcript told the same story. No direct evidence, no confirmed conspiracy, no criminal coordination. Those words appeared repeatedly. Bongino asked why those transcripts were withheld. He did not speculate. He cited dates. He cited release authority. He cited refusals. The human impact followed. Careers damaged, families harassed, public trust fractured, all connected to claims that were never substantiated. He referenced General Michael Flynn, a decorated officer, a public narrative built around suspicion, legal consequences that would later be questioned, damage that could not be undone. Bongino did not claim intent. He laid out sequence, statements made, evidence known at the time, contradictions recorded. The room grew quieter. Staffers stopped typing. Senators avoided eye contact. The hearing had shifted from performance to documentation. That change was unmistakable. Bongino moved to later appearances. CNN, MSNBC repeated assertions, each tied to a date. He read exact quotations, no paraphrasing, no interpretation, just Schiff's words. And then the corresponding findings. The Mueller report was read aloud. Volume 1, page 2. No establishment of conspiracy. The language was explicit. Bongino noted that Schiff continued making claims after that release. He cited a May 2019 appearance. The statements were again recorded. Again, no supporting evidence followed. The pattern continued. He turned to the Steele dossier, publicly promoted, privately disputed, disavowed by primary sources, documented by the FBI. Bongino cited interviews conducted in early 2017. The dossier's main source walked back its claims. That information was known internally. Yet public statements continued to suggest corroboration. That discrepancy was highlighted. The Horowitz report followed. 17 significant errors, material omissions, procedural failures. Public conclusions contrasted sharply with internal findings. Bongino referenced public responses to that report. Claims of vindication, claims contradicted by the text itself. Those contradictions were read aloud. The record spoke clearly. He then addressed the Nunes memo, dismissed publicly, confirmed later by multiple investigations. The sequence was laid out. The outcome was not debated. Bongino did not accuse. He compared timelines, statements versus findings, public messaging versus sworn testimony. The contrast was left to the audience. As the minutes passed, senators began leaving. No announcements, no speeches, just quiet exits. The cameras noticed. Schiff attempted to pivot. He referenced broader concerns. He referenced interference generally. Bongino redirected him. The question remained specific. Where is the evidence you said you had? The phrasing did not change. The tone did not rise. The repetition carried weight. The silence deepened. This was no longer a debate. It was a record review. One side had documents. The other had prior statements. The gap was visible. By the time the attorney stood, the room already understood. No announcement was made. No explanation offered. A brief whisper. Then the chair scraped back. Schiff watched him go. He did not follow. He did not speak. The folder remained on the table. The camera did not cut away. The room did not gasp when the lawyer walked out. It did something worse. It went still. People stopped moving like they were afraid the microphone might catch them breathing. Schiff sat there, watching the door close, and the absence beside him became its own testimony. Bongino did not celebrate. He did not smirk. He simply looked down at the folder again. That calm was unnerving because it said he still had more. And everyone in the room could feel it. Schiff tried to gather himself. He adjusted his posture like a man remembering he was on camera. He reached for the microphone as if tone could substitute for substance. But the hearing had already changed shape. This wasn't about who sounded confident anymore. Bongino asked the question again. Not louder, not slower, just cleaner. "Where's your evidence, Congressman?" Schiff attempted to answer with generalities. He spoke about interference. He spoke about serious concerns. He spoke the way politicians speak when the specific corner is too tight. Bongino did not let him live in that fog. He brought it back to Schiff's own words. He brought it back to those interviews. He brought it back to the promise of proof. He brought it back to the certainty Schiff had projected for years. Then he waited. The wait was part of the strategy. In television, silence is danger. It makes the viewer lean forward. It makes the speaker fill space. And if the speaker has nothing real to fill it with, the silence exposes that faster than any rebuttal. Schiff tried to pivot to Trump again. He tried to drag the room into familiar partisan terrain. He tried to summon the old rhythm where accusation becomes defense. Bongino shook his head once, and the committee room felt that motion like a gavel. "We're not doing that," Bongino said. His tone stayed even. "This isn't about him right now." He tapped the folder with 2 fingers. "This is about you saying you had evidence." He returned to the witness transcripts. 53 people, under oath, inside Schiff's own investigation. And still, no direct proof of the charge Schiff had sold to the public. Bongino read more excerpts. He did not cherry-pick with theatrics. He read them plainly, like an investigator reading a case file. The effect was worse than shouting, because it sounded like routine, and routine made it believable. Schiff's expression tightened as names were mentioned. Clapper, Brennan, Yates, McCabe, Comey. People Schiff had treated as pillars of credibility when it suited the story. Now their sworn words were being used to prove that story had no spine. Bongino pressed the timeline. When did Schiff have the testimony? When did Schiff speak publicly afterward? How often did Schiff repeat the claim? How long did Schiff continue after findings contradicted it? The sequence did not flatter Schiff. Then Bongino shifted to the cost. Not political cost. Human cost. The kind that doesn't show up in a press release. He described what happens when a public figure implies criminal betrayal without proof. How it follows people home. How it turns strangers into threats. How it stains reputations even when no charges come. How the correction never reaches as far as the accusation did. Schiff tried to object to the framing. He said words like context and mischaracterization. He tried to sound like he was disputing interpretation. Bongino held up the printed transcript again. "Those are your words," he said. The room turned its attention to the physical paper. Something about ink is harder to argue with than memory. Video is harder to argue with than intent. A quote is harder to outrun than a headline. And Bongino had built a ladder of them. He moved to another section of the folder. A thicker one. The tabs were labeled. The pages were numbered. The organization itself sent a message. This wasn't improvised. Schiff looked down briefly, then back up. That glance lasted less than a second, but it read like a man measuring how deep the hole was, and realizing it was deeper than he could climb out of on live television. He swallowed, then tried to speak again. Bongino cut him off, not with volume, but with pace. He kept moving. He kept the momentum on paper and record. And that forced Schiff into reaction, which is where the weak argument always shows. He referenced the Steele dossier again. He referenced how it was presented publicly. He referenced how it was questioned internally. He referenced how the surveillance process relied on information later criticized as unreliable. He did not claim conclusions beyond the documented findings. Schiff attempted to defend the broader purpose of the investigation. Bongino did not debate the purpose. He debated the claims. He debated the certainty. He debated the repeated statement that proof existed when it did not. And he kept bringing it back to that same question. At the edge of the frame, senators shifted in their seats. Staff leaned in to whisper. Phones appeared, then disappeared. The kind of silent coordination that happens when people realize the moment is turning. And they want out before the camera catches them attached to it. Bongino paused and looked toward the gallery. He acknowledged the cameras without playing to them. He said the public deserved something better than narratives. He said people deserved honesty about what was known and what was not. Then he returned to the record again. He mentioned the way media amplifies certainty, how viewers confuse confidence with proof, how repeated phrases become accepted truth, how authority can become a substitute for evidence, and how dangerous that substitution is in a country already split. Schiff's face tightened further when the word proof landed. He had used it too freely for too long. Now it was coming back like a debt collector. Bongino did not insult him. He did not need to. He asked again, "Where's your evidence, Congressman?" The question was no longer just a question. It was a spotlight, and Schiff had nowhere to stand outside it. Schiff finally tried a different tactic. He started to parse words. He started to argue what collusion means in common speech versus legal terms. He started to retreat into definitions. Bongino allowed him 2 sentences. Then Bongino opened the Mueller report again. He read the finding cleanly. He contrasted it with Schiff's television certainty. He pointed out that Schiff did not speak in legal nuance on those shows. He spoke in promises. The distinction mattered. Schiff had not been careful. He had not said, "We suspect." He had not said, "We're investigating." He had said he had more than circumstantial evidence. Bongino let that phrase hang again. More than circumstantial evidence. It sounded heavy when repeated in a Senate room. It sounded heavier when no proof followed it. And it sounded heaviest when Schiff could not produce what he had claimed to possess. Another senator left. Then another. Not a stampede. A slow drain. The kind of exit that avoids headlines while still avoiding accountability. Bongino watched none of them. He kept his eyes on Schiff. He kept his voice measured. He kept the narrative anchored to documents. And that discipline made the room feel like the floor was tilting. Schiff asked for time. Bongino nodded once. He gave him the space. And Schiff filled it with nothing but more distance from the central point. He spoke about protecting democracy. He spoke about institutions. He spoke about foreign threats. He spoke in broad brushstrokes. Bongino responded with a simple line. "We're talking about your evidence," he said. He waited a beat. "Not your speeches." And the room tightened again. He returned to the question for the next time. "Where's your evidence, Congressman?" Now it sounded like procedure. Now it sounded like documentation. Now it sounded like an investigator closing a loop. Schiff still had no answer. A staffer approached Schiff's table and stopped. They hesitated, like they weren't sure they were allowed to help. They leaned in, whispered something, and stepped back. Schiff nodded without looking at them. Bongino turned one more page. He lifted another document. He told Schiff that if the evidence existed, this was the moment to present it. He said this was the safest room in Washington to tell the truth. Then he waited again. The silence stretched, 10 seconds, then more. And the cameras did what cameras always do. They held the shot. Schiff's lips moved once, then stopped. He seemed to search for an angle that would not collapse. He seemed to search for words that would not contradict prior words. He seemed to realize that any definitive claim would demand something tangible, and he had nothing tangible to offer. Bongino did not interrupt the silence. He let it do the work. He let it become the answer. Then he spoke again, softly. "Your silence says enough," he said. He did not claim guilt. He did not pronounce a verdict. He simply pointed out what everyone could see. And with that, he moved to the next section, the one he had warned about earlier, the one tied not to 2016, but to 2020, the one that made several people in the room stop pretending they were not worried. He said the phrase carefully, Hunter Biden's laptop. He framed it as a public controversy that later received authentication from major outlets. He emphasized the timeline, not the emotion. And Schiff's posture changed just slightly, like he knew this was where the ground got thinner. Bongino referenced Schiff's public statements from October 2020. He referenced the claim of Russian disinformation. He referenced how that claim was repeated widely. He referenced how later reporting described the laptop as authentic. And he asked a simple question inside that context. What was your evidence then? The room understood why he asked. The phrase, "Where's your evidence?" had expanded beyond one storyline. It had become a test of credibility, and Schiff was failing it in real time. He did not say Schiff stole anything. He did not tell the audience what to conclude. He described how narratives can affect voter perception. He referenced post-election survey claims that circulated widely. He kept the discussion in the lane of impact and record. Schiff tried to dispute the relevance. Bongino answered with the same calm. "Relevance is credibility," he said. "If you claim certainty, you owe evidence." Then he asked it again. "Where's your evidence, Congressman?" Schiff's face drained of color. His hand tightened around the microphone. The room did not move. The record kept rolling. The phrase no longer sounded like a question. It sounded like a standard that had finally been enforced. "Where's your evidence, Congressman?" Each time Bongino asked it, the room understood more clearly that this was not rhetorical. It was procedural. Bongino shifted his weight slightly and returned to the calendar. He emphasized October 2020 without dramatizing it. 2 weeks before a national election. A story broke that carried political consequences, and Schiff responded publicly with absolute certainty. Bongino read the transcript slowly. The CNN appearance, the exact wording, the claim that the story came from the Kremlin. No qualifiers, no caution, no acknowledgement of uncertainty. He contrasted that statement with what was known internally at the time. Not what was rumored, not what was suspected, what was documented, what was briefed. Bongino explained that intelligence assessments require corroboration. They require sourcing. They require internal review. He did not accuse Schiff of malice. He focused on the absence of supporting intelligence. He referenced the Director of National Intelligence's public statement days later, a clear contradiction. No intelligence supporting the claim of foreign disinformation. That statement existed. It was public. And Schiff never corrected his own. The distinction mattered. Silence after certainty is not neutral. Silence preserves the original impression. Silence lets the headline live longer than the correction. Bongino let the room absorb that. Schiff attempted to argue that he was relying on expert opinion. Bongino asked which experts, which reports, which briefings, which documents. The question narrowed again. Bongino referenced the letter signed by former intelligence officials. He described it carefully. He did not call it fraudulent. He did not overstate its claims. He simply read what it actually said. The letter suggested earmarks. It did not claim verification. It did not claim proof. It did not state certainty. Yet, the media presentation transformed suggestion into fact. Bongino highlighted that transformation. How language hardens when repeated. How speculation becomes conclusion when authority signs off. How viewers rarely read beyond the headline, and how elected officials understand that dynamic. He noted that none of the signatories had examined the underlying material. That detail mattered. It was not hidden. It was later admitted, and it undermined the weight the letter was given. Schiff shifted again. His shoulders tightened. He tried to say the letter represented consensus. Bongino responded that consensus without evidence is opinion, and opinion presented as fact has consequences. The hearing room felt smaller. The gallery leaned forward. Even the chairman appeared restrained. This was no longer a partisan exchange. It was a credibility audit. Bongino then referenced later reporting. Major outlets acknowledging authenticity, forensic verification, confirmed emails, delayed corrections. He did not celebrate those admissions. He did not attack the media directly. He stated the sequence: claim, suppression, election, acknowledgement. And he left the inference to the listener. Schiff attempted to minimize the impact. Bongino countered with documented voter perception data. He was careful with language. He said reported and surveyed. He avoided absolute claims. The point was not outcome. The point was responsibility. If an official speaks with certainty, the public assumes backing. If that certainty lacks evidence, trust erodes. That erosion does not respect party lines. Bongino returned to Schiff. He asked whether Schiff had seen any intelligence assessment supporting his claim at the time. Schiff did not answer directly. He spoke about context again. Context did not fill the gap. Bongino did not raise his voice. He did not accuse Schiff of coordination. He simply asked whether the evidence existed. The simplicity was disarming, and Schiff had no response. The repetition began to feel inevitable. "Where's your evidence, Congressman?" The phrase landed heavier each time, not because it changed, but because the answer never did. Bongino paused again. He let the silence stretch. He looked at the chairman briefly, then back to Schiff. This was still Schiff's opportunity. And it was closing. A senator in the second row gathered their papers. Another followed. No speeches, no gestures. Just exits timed between camera cuts. Bongino referenced congressional oversight responsibility, how committees are entrusted with classified material, how selective disclosure distorts public understanding, how withholding full context misleads by omission. The language stayed precise. He brought up the delayed release of transcripts again. Years withheld, released only after pressure. Content contradicting public narrative. That sequence was not disputed. Schiff attempted to argue classification concerns. Bongino acknowledged classification rules. Then he pointed out that Schiff had spoken freely on television. Classification did not stop certainty. It only stopped correction. That contradiction landed hard. If information was too sensitive to release, it was too sensitive to imply. If it was safe to imply, it was safe to contextualize. Schiff had done neither. He had chosen assertion. Bongino emphasized that investigators do not announce conclusions before evidence. They follow it. They document it. They test it. And when it fails, they say so. Schiff's grip on the microphone tightened again. He attempted to reclaim moral authority. He spoke about safeguarding democracy. Bongino responded calmly. Democracy requires truth, he said. He did not elaborate. He did not sermonize. He returned to the documents. The restraint made the statement stronger. It sounded less like rhetoric and more like policy. Bongino then addressed leaks. Not accusations, patterns, timing, calls placed shortly after briefings, stories published the next day. He did not name reporters. He did not speculate about intent. He referenced phone records, dates and times, connections that raised questions. Schiff objected. Bongino clarified that he was not alleging guilt on the spot. He was documenting behavior that warranted scrutiny. Oversight does not require verdicts. It requires transparency. The committee chair shifted in his seat. The room sensed escalation without theatrics. This was not shouting. This was accumulation. And accumulation is harder to dismiss. Bongino explained how partial leaks distort understanding, how context matters, how selective disclosure can create narratives detached from reality, how trust collapses when corrections come too late. The explanation was clinical. Schiff tried again to redirect to broader threats. Bongino redirected back to the record. One man's statements, one committee's authority, one repeated claim of evidence. The question returned. Where's your evidence, Congressman? Now it felt like the closing of a loop, a procedural checkpoint that had never been satisfied. And the absence had become the answer. Schiff looked down, not at notes, not at documents, at the table. The gesture lasted longer than before. Bongino waited. The silence stretched again. No staffer moved, no senator interrupted. The cameras stayed fixed. When Bongino spoke again, his tone did not change. For the record, he said, when asked to produce supporting evidence, none has been presented. He did not embellish. He did not accuse. That sentence carried more weight than any accusation could, because it described exactly what had happened, and it would exist in transcript form long after the hearing ended. Facts outlast performances, and silence is a fact. He closed the folder partway, not fully, as if to signal there was still more inside, but also that enough had already been shown. The room understood. Schiff finally spoke again. His voice was quieter, less controlled. He said the process had been politicized. The claim fell flat. Bongino replied once more. Evidence isn't political, he said. It either exists or it doesn't. He let that stand alone. Then he sat back. The chair moved to adjourn. No objections were raised. No final statements were requested. The gavel fell softly. The room exhaled. Schiff remained seated. Others stood. Staff gathered papers. Cameras lingered. The contrast was unmistakable. The folder stayed on the table, unmoved, unclaimed, full of records, and empty of the evidence Schiff had promised. The gavel had fallen, but the moment did not end. It lingered in the way unfinished moments always do. People moved, yet nothing felt resolved. Schiff remained seated as the room emptied. The absence around him spoke louder than any closing statement. Bongino gathered his papers without urgency. He did not rush. He did not look back. The folder stayed on the table for a moment longer than necessary, a physical reminder of what had just happened. Staffers whispered near the doorway. Producers checked phones. Reporters typed furiously, trying to frame what they had just witnessed. No one wanted to miss the angle. But there was no clever angle to soften it. Outside the chamber, senators avoided cameras. Some offered brief remarks about process. Others declined comment entirely. The phrase ongoing review appeared more than once. It sounded thin even as it was spoken. Within minutes, clips began circulating online. Not edited highlights, not commentary, just the question, and the silence that followed it. "Where's your evidence, Congressman?" Repeated, unanswered, looped without context. Context was no longer needed. Cable networks scrambled. Producers booked panels. Former officials were asked to explain. Explanations filled airtime. None filled the gap. The problem was not interpretation. It was absence. An absence Schiff himself had never acknowledged. An absence that had now been exposed in a formal setting. An absence that could not be filled retroactively. Bongino did not appear on television that afternoon. He did not give victory interviews. He let the record stand. Investigators trust paper more than praise. And the paper was already public. By early evening, the full hearing transcript was circulating. Not summaries, not opinion pieces. The raw exchange. Every pause intact. Viewers noticed the same thing. Each time Schiff spoke, he widened the frame. Each time Bongino responded, he narrowed it. Evidence does not expand under pressure. It either appears or it does not. Legal analysts debated implications carefully. They avoided speculation. They spoke about standards, about oversight responsibilities, about the difference between assertion and substantiation. No charges were announced. No conclusions were drawn by the committee that day. The hearing did not end with handcuffs or resolutions. It ended with documentation. And documentation has a long memory. The phrase "on the record" mattered now. Statements once made casually were being re-examined. Dates were being aligned. Testimony compared to interviews. Certainty measured against what was actually known at the time. Schiff's prior appearances resurfaced. Not edited maliciously, just replayed. The confidence sounded different now. Certainty ages poorly when unsupported. Some commentators argued that politics had always been the point. Others argued that intent mattered more than outcome. But intent could not supply missing proof, and outcome could not erase the public record. The hearing had shifted the ground beneath both arguments. By nightfall, the question had become shorthand, not just for this case, but for every claim made with authority. "Where's your evidence?" It was no longer rhetorical. Schiff released a statement late that evening. It spoke about dedication to public service. It spoke about resisting misinformation. It spoke about commitment to democracy. It did not mention evidence. The omission was noted immediately. Critics pointed it out. Supporters tried to redirect. Neither side could supply what was missing. The silence continued to echo. In private, aides assessed damage. Talking points were drafted and redrafted. Some lines were abandoned entirely. Others were softened. The certainty was gone. Bongino returned to his office. The folder was logged. The documents were secured. Procedure resumed. That was how he worked. Oversight committees request records all the time. Most requests disappear into bureaucracy. This one had been answered publicly, with transcripts, with timelines. The next morning, headlines reflected restraint. Words like tense and confrontational appeared, but also words like unanswered and unresolved. No outlet could honestly say the evidence had been shown. That mattered. Law schools discussed the hearing in class, not for theatrics, for process, for the dangers of certainty without disclosure, for how oversight is supposed to function. Political science professors paused lectures to show the clip. They stopped the video at the silence. They asked students what should happen next. The answers varied. The question did not. Schiff appeared less frequently in the days that followed. Interviews were postponed. Statements replaced appearances. The strategy shifted from assertion to containment. That shift was visible. Bongino remained largely silent publicly. He had said what he needed to say. Investigators do not narrate, they document. And documentation had been delivered. Weeks later, the hearing was still referenced, not as a scandal, but as a moment when certainty met scrutiny. And scrutiny was not satisfied. The phrase endured because it was simple, not accusatory, not partisan, just procedural. Evidence is the currency of claims. The hearing did not settle debates. It reframed them. It reminded viewers that authority is not proof, that repetition does not create truth, that silence, when evidence is demanded, is itself informative. Schiff continued serving. No immediate consequences followed. Institutions move slowly by design, but reputations move faster, and trust moves fastest of all. For many viewers, the hearing marked a turning point, not in allegiance, but in expectation. They began asking the same question elsewhere. They began listening differently. The system did not collapse. It did not explode. It did what systems sometimes do at their best. It recorded a discrepancy and left it there for history. The folder was archived. The transcript was filed. The video remained online, unedited, unargued, and every time the clip resurfaced, the same moment held. The question, the pause, the lack of an answer. It did not need embellishment. It spoke for itself. Time did what time always does after moments like this. It stripped away noise. It removed reaction. It left only record, and the record did not change. In the days that followed, analysts replayed the exchange frame by frame, not to score points, to understand how certainty had been built, and how it collapsed when pressed for proof. That collapse did not happen loudly. It happened quietly, in pauses, in deflections, in answers that never arrived. Those moments lingered longer than any accusation. The question itself became instructional, not hostile, not ideological, just procedural. Evidence is the foundation of claims. Bongino had not accused Schiff of crimes on the floor. He had not declared guilt. He had done something more unsettling. He had asked for substantiation and documented its absence. That distinction mattered to lawyers. It mattered to investigators. It mattered to viewers who had watched years of certainty go untested. For the first time, the test was applied in public, and it was not passed. Commentators searched for motives. Some argued political strategy. Others argued misjudgment. But motives do not fill evidentiary gaps. They explain behavior, not proof. What stayed with viewers was the structure. Claim, repetition, authority, silence under scrutiny. That sequence was hard to ignore. Schiff's supporters argued that broader conclusions were justified. They cited interference generally. They cited institutional trust. They cited intentions. They did not cite the missing evidence. Critics argued that the damage was already done. They pointed to public trust. They pointed to personal consequences. They pointed to years of division fueled by certainty. They pointed back to the same question. Neither side could escape it. Because the hearing had not ended with opinion. It had ended with an unanswered request. That request now lived independently, detached from partisan framing. The phrase traveled. It appeared in editorials. It appeared in debates. It appeared in classrooms, always attached to the idea of accountability. Political staffers noticed the shift. Messaging softened. Certainty was replaced with caution. Words like allegedly returned. The tone changed. This was not because of fear. It was because of exposure. Exposure teaches faster than warning. When claims are tested publicly, others take note. That is how systems correct themselves. Bongino's role was debated endlessly. Some praised restraint. Some criticized tone. But no one disputed what he had done procedurally. He had asked for evidence and waited. That waiting was the key. He did not rush to fill space. He did not rescue Schiff from silence. He allowed the absence to exist on record. Investigators understand the power of that choice. Schiff's future statements reflected adjustment. They were more careful, more qualified, more distant from certainty. That shift was subtle but real. Institutions rarely announce lessons learned. They demonstrate them. And in this case, the demonstration was restraint replacing certainty, caution replacing assertion, process replacing performance. The hearing did not rewrite history. It reframed it. It forced a distinction between suspicion and proof, between narrative and documentation, between authority and evidence. For viewers, the takeaway was simpler. If someone claims certainty, ask how they know. If they promise proof, ask where it is. If the answer widens instead of clarifies, pay attention. Those habits matter. The system did not resolve everything. It never does in a single moment. But it introduced friction where there had been none. And friction slows misinformation. Sometimes that is enough. Long after the cameras left, the transcript remained. It would not age. It would not soften. It would not reinterpret itself. It would simply exist. Future hearings would reference it indirectly. Future witnesses would remember it explicitly. No one wanted to sit in that silence again. No one wanted to promise proof they could not produce. The lesson traveled quietly. History is rarely decided in dramatic climaxes. It shifts in small procedural moments. A question asked, a document opened, an answer not given. That was what made this hearing endure. Not outrage, not triumph, just a standard applied evenly, and an expectation enforced. "Where's your evidence, Congressman?" The words stayed because they were ordinary. They were the question every investigator asks. They were the question every citizen deserves answered. And on that day, they were not. The hearing ended without spectacle. No cheers, no chaos. Just a record entered, and a silence preserved. In time, other stories would replace it. They always do. But the standard would remain. Claims demand proof. And silence is not proof. The silence did not disappear when the story moved on. It settled. It became part of the background noise of politics. Quiet, but persistent. Like a note that never fully resolves. Other hearings followed. Other controversies competed for attention. But this exchange lingered because it did not rely on spectacle. It relied on absence. And absence is difficult to overwrite. When Schiff returned to public appearances, the shift was noticeable. He spoke more carefully. He avoided absolute language. He referenced processes instead of outcomes. That adjustment did not go unnoticed. Journalists began framing questions differently. They asked follow-ups sooner. They pressed for sources. They interrupted certainty more quickly. The rhythm had changed. Viewers noticed too. They began asking where claims came from. They asked what evidence supported them. They asked why some stories moved faster than verification. The audience had learned the question. That question traveled beyond this case. It appeared in unrelated debates. It surfaced in policy discussions. It crept into interviews that once relied on authority alone. Evidence became a demanded currency again. The hearing was cited quietly in newsrooms, not as a warning, as a reference point. A moment when confidence failed under scrutiny. Editors remembered that. Bongino never framed himself as a hero. He did not claim victory. He described his role narrowly: oversight, documentation. That restraint protected the record. It made the exchange harder to dismiss as partisan theater. It grounded the moment in process. Process survives outrage cycles. Performance does not. Schiff's allies argued that the broader conclusions still held. They said investigations were justified. They said vigilance was necessary. They said democracy required suspicion. None of that answered the central gap. Suspicion is not proof. Vigilance is not evidence. Authority is not verification. Those distinctions mattered again. They had been blurred for too long. For some viewers, the hearing validated long-held doubts. For others, it created new ones. Both reactions were significant. Trust does not disappear all at once. It erodes in moments like this. The legal community discussed the exchange in measured terms, not to speculate about consequences, to examine standards. When public officials speak with certainty, what duty follows? That question gained weight. The hearing became a case study, not in guilt or innocence, in communication, in restraint, in the cost of overstating what you can prove. Students studying government watched the clip years later. They were not told what to think. They were asked what was missing. They noticed the same pause. They asked the same question. Where's your evidence? It was no longer attached to one name. It became a principle, a reminder, a baseline expectation. The country did not heal overnight. No single moment could do that. But something shifted subtly. The appetite for certainty without proof diminished. Caution returned. Politicians adjusted accordingly. Some learned quickly. Others learned publicly. The lesson applied evenly. Evidence first. The hearing was not dramatic in retrospect. No shouting, no collapse. Just a quiet failure to answer. And that was enough. In time, even Schiff's critics moved on. But they did not forget. They remembered the pause. They remembered the question. They remembered that no answer came. The folder became symbolic, not for what it contained, but for what it demanded. Documentation, verification. Future witnesses saw it differently. They prepared more carefully. They avoided promises they could not keep. They spoke with qualifiers. The system adjusted. This was how accountability often worked, not with punishment, with exposure, with standards enforced once and remembered afterward. The hearing did not close a chapter. It marked a margin note, a reminder scribbled into the public record. Claims require proof. Silence carries meaning. Years later, the clip would resurface again, usually without commentary. Just the question, just the pause, just the record. And each time it did, it asked the same thing of the viewer. Listen closely. Notice what is not said. Notice what is not shown. And decide accordingly. That is how trust is rebuilt. Not through declarations, through restraint, through evidence, through the willingness to say nothing when nothing exists. The hearing ended long ago, but its lesson remains active. Authority must be earned repeatedly. Proof must follow promise, and questions deserve answers. That day in the Senate chamber did not rewrite history. It clarified responsibility. It reminded the country of a basic rule. If you claim certainty, show your work. If you cannot, expect the silence to speak for you. The record remains, the question remains, and the absence of an answer remains part of history.